According to a recent Pew survey, white evangelical Protestants overwhelmingly support President Trump. 78% approve of his job in office, while 18% disapprove. This survey was taken shortly before adult film actress Stromy Daniels sat down for 60 Minutes, where she talked about her alleged sexual encounter with Mr. Trump. But will they remain faithful to the president moving forward? Michael Graham thinks so. In his new column for CBSNews.com, he says evangelicals are so willing to support President Trump, they've abandoned their principles on character and morality in order to make room for him. Michael is a CBSN political contributor and columnist for the Boston Herald. He joins me now from Boston. Great to see you again, Michael.
Happy to be here.
So what are some reasons evangelicals throw so much of their support behind the president?
You know, if you look at the guy, you just think to yourself, there's no way that this can happen. I'm a graduate of Oral Roberts University, an evangelical college. My parents are evangelicals down south. We went to church 4 or 5 times a week. And if you had said that they would enthusiastically be supporting a guy whose peccadillos were on the front page of the paper and on TV, I would have said no way. But they're in because they've hired him to do a job. I saw an interesting interview the other day after the Stromy Daniels program aired here on CBS, and a evangelical woman told a reporter, "We didn't hire a pastor." And the theory is that you've hired, in essence, a political, for maybe the metaphor is hitman, to go, take on your enemies, a political bouncer, if you will, to clean up the place. And you don't mind that he gets his knuckles bloody because he's there to fight for you. And I don't think people who aren't familiar with people of faith, maybe if you want to call them East Coast elites, whatever, I don't know that they get just how embattled people of faith felt during the Obama years. You had nuns who were forced to deal with the issue of birth control because of Obamacare and mandates. You had the definition of marriage changed not by votes in state after state, which would have happened anyway, but by fiat, by a 5-4 vote from an unelected Supreme Court. You had stories where someone owns a small pizza shop in the middle of nowhere, and someone walks in and says, "Would you cater a gay wedding if you were asked?" And someone says, "Well, no, I don't think so. It's against our beliefs." And they become a national pariah. And that kind of, people felt like they were under assault. And so Donald Trump has made a deal with evangelicals, which is, I will fight for you. Instead of having a government, a president who's looking at you as a problem, I want to be on your side. And so it's a very much, as a pastor I quote in the piece said, it's a transactional relationship between evangelicals and the president.
Well, given what you just spelled out and the importance of these kind of social, cultural issues, we know that these social conservatives are a key part of the president's base. So does that mean, the bottom line, this issue of Stromy Daniels really does not pose a threat at all politically to President Trump?
As I've said to my friends on the right, if you're not going to care, nobody's going to care. Because when you ask evangelicals and social conservatives about defending Trump, the first word, you cannot get to 2 sentences without the word Clinton appearing. And it appears in one of 2 contexts. Look at what happened when Bill Clinton was caught doing what he did in the Oval Office, mistreating a young girl, and feminists rallied around him. And then the other Clinton argument they make is Hillary. Hillary was openly hostile to us. She gave a speech in 2015 where she said on issues like abortion that religions were just going to have to change. Well, that was not the right message to give people who take their faith very seriously. And remember, the message from the church community now is not, you have to do it our way. The days of trying to ban things or boycott things are over. They just want to be left alone to practice their faith, and they feel like the government won't allow them to. And Donald Trump was the barrier, the guy who stepped up to create some space for them and defend their freedom.
What about other Republicans when it comes to this particular allegation by Stromy Daniels? Is this a story? It's one thing for what you just spelled out, the justification or the reasons that they support President Trump, but other Republicans who are facing their own contest this year, is there a more nuanced view, and does it in any way, shape, or form impact their races?
You know, Republicans have been able to get by as best they can so far with the "that's just Trump" argument. And one of the advantages of having President Trump be such a kind of wild card, he's openly hostile to Republicans. Remember, he spends about as much time bashing Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan as he does praising them. He's created the space, and so Republicans just go, you're right, I don't like this. I don't, the phrase that some of the stuff he does.
Right.
Now, that some of the stuff includes a lot of things from dumb tweets to, oh my gosh, did you hear the one about the stripper? You know, so they kind of lump it all into that, I don't like what he does, and then they quickly go to, I like the tax cuts. We need to do something about trade, or I'm glad he's standing up to Russia, Syria, et cetera. And that's what Republicans are going to try to do. It doesn't change the fact that Trump continues to be a drag on Republicans heading into the midterms. And data point after data point show that it's going to be very tough for Republican members of the House to hold on to a majority no matter what Trump does.
Yeah, because how much typically does a president's personal conduct usually factor into elections?
You know, that's an interesting question. You know, on Bill Clinton, you could argue that it actually had an inverse effect because the argument goes that Republicans played their hand. They were overplayed their hand. They were so mean-spirited about their treatment of Bill Clinton. They were so unpleasant. And plus, I mean, let's be honest, the media was more favorable to Bill Clinton than they are to Donald Trump, that it actually kind of worked in reverse. Once again, Trump is so strange and odd. You know, you could argue that in no traditional sense is Donald Trump the guy, a Republican. He's had a lot of Republican policies from Republican policymakers around him, and because, quite frankly, a lot of policy gets made in Congress. You have to get things passed through Congress, and the Republicans still control that. So that, once again, gives Republicans some room to get away from his personal behavior. What they can't get away from, if his approval rating stays at 40% or below, it is almost impossible for Republicans to hold on to the House based on historical outcomes.
Let's turn to another topic here. You've also recently written about the gun debate. Retired Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens called for a repeal of the Second Amendment in a New York Times op-ed. He called it a, quote, relic of the 18th century. What's your take on that?
My take on that is that the NRA should send the retired justice a gift basket, some flowers. I can't even imagine the level of membership spike and support that they've gotten from their members, because this is what people who vote on the gun issue fear. Mm-hmm. They fear that for all the talk about common sense gun control, that the real agenda is confiscation of guns. And that's why I suggested in my CBSN piece earlier this week that this weekend may not have the positive impact on gun control legislation you might think, because so much of the rhetoric was so anti-gun owners. It wasn't mere, the message had been, here are 3 things we want to do about background checks and about capacity of magazines, et cetera. That's one thing. But there are a lot of signs about the NRA equals murder. Well, there's 6 million members of the NRA. Lots of talk about, you know, you love your guns more than you love your child. That's the kind of message that feeds. And you can argue that it's paranoia, or you can argue that it's a little bit legitimate concern. But either way, it feeds the fears of the people who vote on guns. And I had a Southern Republican consultant say to me that day, as I called and said, are you watching this? He said, these people are out today. They'll stay home in November. The only people who vote on the gun issue are gun owners. And we'll test that thesis, I guess, in a few months.
Yeah, before I let you go, does it temper your view at all, the notion that there were so many young people, though? It wasn't sort of your, adults that maybe the NRA is perhaps used to hearing from, but the fact that these were the voices of young people who were describing the very real terror that they feel in their classrooms sometimes, in their neighborhoods, because of the fear of gun violence.
I think that the moments this weekend and the moments going forward that will have the most impact towards creating enough pressure for gun control legislation were the moments when the young lady, Emma Gonzalez, I believe her name is, mentioned by name the people who will never again, see their friends in the lunchroom or hang out at the beach. That's powerful. But when you have other people like David Hogg standing up and talking about the culture of corruption and the blood on your hands and the revolution starts today, 58% of Americans say that they believe that gun ownership keeps their own communities safer. There is still majority support for the right of individuals to own handguns. That's where America is. They can be persuaded over time. I absolutely believe that. But threats and anger and John Stevens saying we're coming after your guns, we're going to get rid of the Second Amendment. Man, if you're hoping for gun owners to stay home in November, this is not the right way to get them to do that.
Michael Graham in Boston. Michael, thanks so much. Always great to see you.
Thanks for having me.